Okay, we're live on YouTube. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Biodiversity Teach-In. Today, we have with us Olivia, Reda, and she's going to be talking to us about plastics in the Great Lakes. Thank you very much for joining us, Olivia. This presentation is sponsored by the Community-Led Environmental Action Network of the Elgin area, or CLEAN Elgin. CLEAN is focused on advocating for policies that implement sustainability practices in School District U46. This includes fostering a community that understands the importance of sustainability and actively works to improve our shared quality of life. This growing organization is excited to provide opportunities for residents and students to get engaged in environmental initiatives through the Fox Valley and beyond. If you want to get involved or you have any questions, please reach out to us at elginclean@gmail.com. Thank you very much, Olivia. I'll turn it over to you now.
Great, thanks so much, Frankie, and thanks to the National Biodiversity Teach-In for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. As Frankie mentioned, I'm going to be talking today about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes, and I come from a nonprofit in the Great Lakes region, Alliance for the Great Lakes. A little bit about myself. So like I said, my name is Olivia Reda. I'm the Volunteer Engagement Coordinator at Alliance for the Great Lakes. And I've been working for the Alliance for just about 2 years. And I work directly with our volunteer programs. And that includes our Adapta beach cleanup program, and also a group of volunteers called Alliance Ambassadors at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. A little background about myself. So I grew up in the Great Lakes region, always having a strong connection to the Great Lakes, loving specifically Lake Michigan. I grew up going to the Indiana Dunes quite a bit, so super familiar with the ecosystem and really passionate about it. I went to school at Indiana University Bloomington and studied environmental science, so I have a natural sciences academic background and did a variety of different field work experiences before ending up at the Alliance. So I did some work with invasive species management, coral reef restoration, worked at the Chicago Botanic Garden with their aquatic plant team. So just a variety of different kind of fieldwork positions. I was attracted to work at the Alliance. I really enjoy that they approach environmental issues from many different topics. So, like I said, today I'll be talking about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. I have my email throughout this presentation, so feel free to reach out with any questions or if you would like more information about any of the things we talk about today. A little bit of an overview. So we'll talk about the importance of the Great Lakes, the work at the Alliance for the Great Lakes, and then we'll dive into plastic pollution. So we'll look at just how much plastic pollution is out there, what happens to this plastic once it's in the ecosystem, impacts on wildlife, humans, and communities, and some actions we can take. But first, I'll tell you a little bit more about the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So the Alliance works to protect the Great Lakes for today and tomorrow, and we do this by involving tens of thousands of people every year in advocacy, volunteering, education, and research to ensure the lakes are healthy and safe for everybody. So we were founded in 1970. We were also originally called the Lake Michigan Federation, which was founded by Lee Batts and a group of advocates. And then in 2006, the scope of our work broadened to kind of be working to protect all 5 Great Lakes. And that came with a name change in 2006 to what it is now, the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So we came with an expanded vision to protect and restore the Great Lakes for people and wildlife forever. So that's a little bit about the Alliance, and we'll go into a little bit more of our work to protect the Great Lakes in a second here. But just to put things into perspective, why do we want to protect the Great Lakes? Why do we care so much about this ecosystem? So some numbers to put that into perspective. So of the world's surface freshwater, 90% of the world's surface water is saltwater, leaving 3% of freshwater. And of that 3%, 2% is frozen in glaciers, leaving 1% of surface freshwater available to life. And of that 1%, almost 20% is here in the Great Lakes. So we hold a lot of fresh water available to life. And as you can see in this graphic, the Great Lakes hold the most surface freshwater in the world. So a super important ecosystem. And a lot of life relies on this ecosystem. So as you can see on the bottom of this infographic, 1 in 10 Americans are getting their drinking water from the Great Lakes, and 1 in 4 Canadians, which amounts to over 40 million people getting their drinking water from the Great Lakes. So a lot of folks are relying on this ecosystem. We need to keep it healthy. But we also need to keep it healthy for some other creatures that call the Great Lakes home. So there are about 3,500 species of plants and animals that call the Great Lakes home. That includes over 170 species of fish and about 180 invasive species. So I know this teaching, we're focusing a lot on biodiversity, so this ties directly into this topic. As you can see, we really need to protect the many different species that call the Great Lakes home. We work a lot talking about invasive species and how we can ensure that invasive species don't outcompete a lot of our native Great Lakes species, which would threaten the biodiversity of the Great Lakes. So as you can see here, we have some of our Great Lakes creatures in this region. We have our lake sturgeon, they're on the upper right. We have our Fowler's toad, they're in the middle. Our painted turtle, they're on the bottom left. And then we have the hairy puccoon, which is that yellow plant, they're in the top left. And the great blue heron, which is one of my favorite Great Lakes species, they're in the middle left. And our piping plover on the right there. So like I said, not only are we protecting this ecosystem for all the human communities, but also the biodiversity of this area and the other species that share this home with us. So now we'll go into specifically what the Alliance does. So you can see here on the screen, this is our mission: to conserve and restore the world's largest freshwater resource using policy, education, and local efforts, ensuring a healthy Great Lakes and clean water for generations of people and wildlife. So how do we accomplish that? We do a lot of different work at the Alliance. We connect and empower people to advocate, give back, and take action to protect the lakes. And we accomplish this with 3 different connected approaches, as you can see on the slide here. So we do this through advocacy and leadership. We partner with communities and decision makers to develop different solutions that protect our lakes and our communities. We do this through education and action. This is the work that I'm involved directly with quite a bit through our volunteerism and different outreach events such as this, empowering people to gain knowledge and take action for the Great Lakes. We look at research and analysis, so we inform community leaders and guide policy to protect the Great Lakes. So what you can see here on this slide are our top 5 Great Lakes priorities. These specifically are for the Biden administration, but the ones for Congress are very similar. So each year the Alliance releases our Great Lakes federal policy priorities. And these are actions that we would like the current administration at the time in Congress to take to protect the Great Lakes. So as you can see here, these are our top 5 this year. You can find more information on these on our website, greatlakes.org, but this kind of puts into perspective the type of work we do, and particularly in 2021. So our 5 priorities this year being: number 1, prioritize environmental justice. So environmental justice seeks to address the unfair distribution of pollution and repair the harm that it causes. So whenever we're looking at different topics relating to the Great Lakes, we are looking through it through an environmental justice lens and making sure we can advance that as much as possible. We also are looking to increase drinking water funding and stop water shutoffs. Clean water is a basic need, and no one should be without clean, safe, affordable drinking water. So there's different efforts that we're pushing for there. We also want to urge the current administration and Congress to support the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And this provides on-the-ground funding for restoration projects for different things like wetland restoration and cleaning up toxic hotspots. So that's very important. Number 4, I already mentioned a little bit about our invasive species campaigns, but fund efforts to stop invasive Asian carp. So we're trying to ensure that Asian carp don't establish in the Great Lakes and threaten the biodiversity of the Great Lakes. And the last one being to address agricultural pollution. So nutrient pollution that fields harmful algal blooms in the Great Lakes are a significant threat to the region's drinking water, quality of life, and economic well-being. So that's a portion of our work as well. Okay, so now we're going to get into specifically the topic of plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. So we're going to look at just how much plastic is out there so we kind of know the scope of what we're talking about. So as you can see from this graph here, since 1950, the production and consumption of plastic has increased exponentially. So we're looking at a lot of production and consumption of plastic. And then when we're looking at just how much plastic is in the Great Lakes, According to Rochester Institute of Technology, over 22 million pounds of plastic are ending up in the Great Lakes every year. So lots of plastic ending up in the Great Lakes, a huge problem for the Great Lakes. We'll talk a little bit more about what this problem looks like and some of the impacts. But I do want to emphasize that here at the Alliance, we see this in our work directly. So like I said, I work with the Adapta Beach Cleanup Program, and part of that program involves keeping track of what we see on the beach. So we take litter data for every cleanup about what we're seeing on the beach. And as you can see from this graph here, so each of these diagrams for each Great Lake is showing how much of the litter found on that beach is composed of plastic. This data is from 2019. I'm using 2019 as a reference because 2020, the data is not super representative of what we typically see, being that not as many cleanups are able to happen with the pandemic. So as we can see from this graph here, about 90% of the litter found on Great Lakes shorelines contain plastic, and this is very typical of what we see through our programs. So just further emphasizing that plastic pollution is a big problem in the Great Lakes. We see evidence of that very often through our work. So when we're talking about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes, it's not always very large pieces. In fact, the pieces are often very, very small. There has been some microplastic research done in the open waters of the Great Lakes. And just to clarify for everybody, microplastics are less than 5 millimeter pieces of plastic. And we see quite a bit of small plastic in our programs, but research also echoes this. Particularly, one study was looking at surface of the lakes and looking at the microplastics found in the surface of lakes. And they were finding that the majority of the particles are less than 1 millimeter in size, as you can see from that little small image there. So like I said, often the plastic is very tiny. The plastic's not going away. It's just breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces. And this graph just kind of like further emphasizes, like I said, we are seeing this in our program. So this graph kind of shows the breakdown of some of the categories that we see through our Adapta Beach program, with tiny trash being a really large category every season. So tiny trash is pieces of litter on the beach that are less than 2.5 centimeters, so very tiny. And those tiny trash pieces are either plastic, glass, or foam. But we see a lot of tiny trash. Oftentimes we'll take groups out to the beach and they will be expecting to see lots of large litter, but in fact, a lot of times it's very small. So we are going to look at just what happens to this plastic once it is out there. So it might be helpful to kind of consider why plastic is used in the first place for different reasons. And often that's because the plastic is very durable. So that often is why we use it in the first place. But unfortunately, that durability often means that it's persisting in the environment for many, many years, sometimes hundreds of years. There's lots of objects we don't even know how long they're persisting in the environment, but they're not going away. They're just breaking down into smaller pieces. And just because we can't see the plastic as large pieces doesn't mean it's not there and affecting the ecosystem. So when we're talking about plastic, that is breaking down and degrading through photodegradation. And that is decomposition through sunlight and air. So sun rays are incorporating oxygen molecules into the plastic, a process called oxidation. And this process makes the plastic brittle and easier to break down. So that's allowing it to break down further. But something we want to be thinking about when we're talking about plastic in the Great Lakes is that this plastic is often underwater, and sunlight and air and oxygen are not as readily available. So sometimes that degradation process might take even longer. The plastic is also degrading through mechanical processes. So that might look like waves and rocks interacting with the plastic, breaking it down further, wind. So also mechanical processes. But we'll want to be thinking about how photodegradation differs from biodegradation, which is a decomposition process through where it's decomposing organic material through microbes. And I showed a photo of a banana, kind of thinking of something organic that would be breaking down through that type of means. So we have kind of some images here, and I would invite anyone listening to kind of just take a little, jot some notes down, take part in the activity. We can kind of all do it on our own and take a look at it. So at the Alliance, we often use an activity called debris degradation cards, and these show different objects that would be degrading in the environment and how long it would take to degrade. So I'll let you all take a second to guess how long you think these items would take to be breaking down into the environment, from the shortest amount of time to the least amount of time. So I'll go ahead and give everybody a second to do that. Okay, so let's see what the results were. Okay, so the item that would be degrading the fastest would be the newspaper, and that might not be too shocking to folks. That would take around 1.5 months, or I'm sorry, 1.5 months. And these approximations are based on many different things, and based on different environmental conditions could take much longer or shorter, depending, but approximations. The next being plywood, 1 to 3 years. Then we have plastic being 50 to 80 years, and a plastic lid taking around 400 years. So as we can see, things like paper that may have more organic materials or wood are taking a lot less time, significantly less time than our plastic items here. So here's another set of 4 items, and I will go ahead and give you all some seconds to jot down some notes and guesses for these. Okay, great. For these, we have the first item, probably not a shocker to many folks, being the banana peel, taking 2 to 5 weeks, our wool socks taking 1 to 5 years, our straws taking 50 to 100 years, and our plastic bottles coming in at a whopping 450 years. So we can just be thinking about these things when we're seeing plastic in the environment or using plastic, that they're existing in the environment for a long, long time. And then here's our third round of items, so I'll go ahead and give you all a couple more seconds to do those. Okay, so we have our paper towels coming in at 2 to 4 weeks, our plastic bags coming in at 10 to 20 years, our foam cup at 50 years, and our diapers at 450 years. So you can see, a lot of these items that have more synthetic material taking a lot longer to degrade in the environment. Okay, another thing to be thinking about when we are thinking of plastic pollution in the Great Lakes, and just plastic pollution entering into any environment in general, is kind of what are the environmental conditions that are interacting with that plastic. So one thing to think about is how ocean plastic pollution differs from Great Lakes plastic pollution. And one reason being that the water is used for very different purposes. So we're not drinking the ocean water, right? But we, like I said before, over 40 million people are getting their drinking water from the Great Lakes. So it's really important to be considering plastic in the Great Lakes. That's the source of drinking water for millions of people. We also want to think about how the plastic is traveling differently. So, ocean debris can wash up from faraway places due to global ocean currents, but Great Lakes plastic pollution flows out from our shorelines, and it's more of like a locally traveling pollution. So we want to be thinking about, the different currents, the ocean currents, and how that differs from the Great Lakes. The water also has different physical properties. So the ocean water is more dense, the salt water is more dense. Like I said, currents are different in the ocean and Great Lakes. And unlike parts of the Great Lakes, the oceans are not freezing in that kind of way. So all of these factors affect how plastic pollution moves through the water, how it breaks down, and how it's affecting wildlife and communities. Also, we'll want to note that there's a lot less information about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes compared to ocean plastic pollution. There's been quite a bit of ocean plastic pollution research. So we're still kind of building that body of research for the Great Lakes and for oceans. But there's a lot more research out there for ocean plastic pollution. So we're still understanding just how much different impacts there are in the Great Lakes due to this issue. So now we kind of have a good idea of the scope of this problem. So let's look at the impacts. So what's happening once this plastic pollution is in the Great Lakes? So Great Lakes plastic pollution poses many threats to the environment, wildlife, and communities. So we're going to dive into some more specifics about that. So one impact on wildlife is entanglement. So I'm sure we've all seen quite a bit of photos of marine life, like dolphins and turtles kind of entangled in different, like the 6-ring plastic, for pop cans, stuff like that. So we see this in the Great Lakes as well, different species, but we also see a lot of entanglement like that. And this can happen with, as you can kind of see, different fishing line or things get entangled, or wildlife get entangled in items like that. And that really just affects their overall ability to move and live and, you know, search for food, affecting their mobility in their environment, which is very detrimental. Another impact when we're talking about wildlife and plastic pollution is ingestion of plastic pieces, which is a concern for many, many reasons. One being a loss of nutrition. So when species are ingesting plastic, that's taking up room that otherwise would have been taken up by nutritious, food that they would otherwise be consuming. It's especially dangerous for young larval fish. A single thread in the stomach of a larval fish is potentially a killer. There's, not much other food to be overcompensating for that. So it's especially dangerous for small larval fish. Ingestions of plastic is also dangerous because wildlife are not only ingesting the chemicals inherently in plastic, things like flame retardants, but they are also ingesting toxins from the water that are absorbed by the plastic materials. So the plastic materials are floating around in the water and might be absorbing other toxins in the water that are then being ingested by wildlife. So more needs to be learned about, like I said, about these impacts and about the results of such exposure. But these things have been linked to things like affected growth rates and reproduction, as well as liver toxicity. So lots of different impacts. So there's an article in National Geographic a while back called Little Pieces, Big Problems. And this really highlights the issue of plastic ingestion within wildlife. So this looked at the presence and effects of small plastic pieces in oily surface slicks on wildlife. And the study was about an area off the coast of Hawaii. So it isn't a marine environment, but we can extrapolate and know that maybe similar things are happening in the Great Lakes. So this article has some really great side-by-side visuals that I thought kind of demonstrated this issue really well. And these images are from these oily slicks, and they're showing how wildlife are often mistaking small plastic pieces for food. So as you can see, these images, the wildlife, their normal food is being mixed up in with quite a bit of plastic pollution. So when they're getting their food from these oily, surface slicks in the water, they're likely consuming, quite a bit of small plastic as well. We also know that plastic pollution has an impact on humans. So we know there's plastic in drinking water, bottled water, beer, sea salt, a lot of different things that humans are putting into their bodies. Once again, a lot more research needs to be done to fully understand the scope of these impacts, but we know it's happening. We know that humans are ingesting microplastics. Microplastics have been found in stool samples of humans, so we know it is making its way through the food chain. We also know that humans are consuming plastic in seafood, so things like fish, mussels, shrimp, making its way up the food chain, these plastic pieces. Plastic pollution in the Great Lakes also has impacts on whole communities, right? So litter and plastic pollution impacts a lot of beaches. So litter decreases property values in areas. It also is going to affect things like tourism in an area and the economy of areas. Folks are often a lot less likely to be going to beaches that have a lot of litter and plastic pollution. So it's having impacts like that as well, community impacts. Okay, so now let's think about, we know plastic pollution is a big problem. We know it's having a lot of impacts. How can we address this problem? So it'd be really nice to say that we can just take a vacuum or net and scoop all of this up, but we all know that it's not that simple, and large-scale projects like that are very expensive, have technical issues. So we really need to take a multi-pronged approach when we're looking at something like plastic pollution, and that would involve different methods like collection, management, and source reduction. So the first thing that we'll talk about is collection. So we should say that when we're talking about collection, we're obviously talking about picking up the debris once it's out there. So kind of managing the symptom of the problem. It's already out there. What are we going to do about it once it's in the ecosystem? This approach can be very difficult because the trash can be scattered everywhere. Also, like we've seen from the prior slides, this plastic is often very small, so hard to collect, hard to retrieve, hard to get out of the ecosystem. Often very difficult to reach locations. It also costs a lot of time and money and volunteer human power to be able to do this. But as we can see in these photos, we can use some different physical interventions like trash screens or nets to capture trash before it's getting into the ecosystem, before it's getting into the Great Lakes. There's also some different kind of creative household products that we've come across. One being the Cora ball. That is the image there down on the bottom left. This is something that you can put in your laundry at home, and it is going to capture those microfibers that are released in your wash from your synthetic clothing. So you throw that in there with your wash, it's collecting those microfibers, you can then see them and remove them before they're getting into the ecosystem, into the Great Lakes. You can also participate in things like we do at the Alliance, like our Adapta Beach program. So just going out there, going out to the ecosystem and picking up that plastic debris and other litter that you're seeing off the beach. Okay, another thing to think about in addressing plastic pollution in the Great Lakes is through management. So kind of making sure that trash and litter gets into the right place before it gets into the environment. So managing that litter and plastic that is out there. Some things to think about are kind of more efficient or creative trash receptacles. So things like recycling bins that have caps and locking lids. So that way, say they're on the beach, they're not being blown over by the wind and having the trash scatter everywhere. So things like that can make a big difference. Also being strategic as to where you're placing them, how many of them are there in those locations. So kind of using observations and data you have available to kind of drive those decisions. You can see on the right, there's just some different creative options as well. So this is a cigarette receptacle, and to kind of encourage folks to use it, it has like a little like question, and you kind of use the cigarette butt to kind of cast your vote and kind of make sure that those cigarette butts are not ending up on the shorelines of the Great Lakes. So a lot of different things out there. These are just a couple examples, but that's another way to address plastic pollution. And then finally, we want to look at source reduction. So prevention, really. So not using the plastic in the first place, and then not having to worry about it getting into the environment after that. So there's a lot of, kind of steps we can take as a whole, as a community. There's also a lot of steps we can take personally. So what can you do as an individual? I'm sure you all are aware of a lot of these steps. We have a lot of kind of good tips and guidance on our website, greatlakes.org. But these personal steps can look like things like, deciding to use reusable products versus single-use products. So we have some different tips for living with less plastic, using things like reusable tote bags, reusable water bottles, different things that you can, be using multiple times versus using once. Like I said, you can take part in our Adapta Beach program. I'll go into detail in that in a second here, but that's another way that you can take part, do your part to remove plastic from the Great Lakes ecosystem. You can also, urge your decision makers, your local decision makers, your congresspeople to care about this issue. Let them know that you care about this issue and you want this to be something that they're thinking about and addressing in their positions. So using that as a way to kind of elevate this issue. There's also different things like actions you can take, like our Plastic-Free Great Lakes Pledge. So you can go to greatlakes.org/take action. This will be linked later on in the presentation as well. But that's a way that you can kind of hold yourself accountable and encourage your community to hold themselves accountable as well, to be reducing our use of plastic. Here's a couple, or we saw the different tips for using less plastic. We also have on our website a toolkit, which is the Plastic-Free Great Lakes Toolkit that you can find at greatlakes.org. And this has a lot of different tips to be a Great Lakes advocate and a champion for plastic-free Great Lakes. It has a lot of different tips for contacting decision makers and taking those steps. A lot of times it can be a little bit intimidating if that's not something you've done before. So there's some different tips on kind of how to go about that, how to be effective when you're thinking about doing that. So I'll go into a little bit more about specifically our Adapta Beach program, and that being a way that you can help address plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. So like I said, I work directly with this program. If you have any questions or wanting to get involved and kind of would like more information about next steps, feel free to email me. I'll have my email again at the end of this presentation. But this is our Adapta Beach website, and that's adapt.greatlakes.org. And on our website, you can find a cleanup in your area, and you can register for the cleanup, fill out all the necessary information. It's very quick to do that. You just go to this website, find a cleanup in your area. You can also become a team leader and host your own cleanup. So that is also very simple to do. You can see in the upper right-hand corner there's an option for leader login. So you would want to go into that, and there are steps on registering for a team leader account. And once you do so, you will then be able to click up top here where it says host a cleanup, and you will be able to register and host a cleanup at the beach and on the date of your choice in the Great Lakes area. So that's an option if you're, in the Great Lakes region and are wanting to take part in that way. I kind of mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but through the Adapta Beach program, we are keeping track of our litter. So we're keeping track of what we're finding on the beach, a lot of that being plastic, and this is how we're able to report out on how big of a problem plastic pollution is in the Great Lakes. A lot of different folks will reach out to us asking for some of that data, people doing projects, things like that. And we have historic data from years back that we're able to provide them. So your litter data is really helpful and does help influence conversations on plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. So we keep track of total weight, who's doing this work, how many volunteers, and also this is just a small section of our sheet. We have a back as well with a bunch of different other categories, but easy to fill out, just tallying different things as you're finding them. As you can see here, we have cleanups happening on all 5 Great Lakes, all 8 Great Lakes states. We even have some cleanups in Canada that happen once in a while. So really a group effort to tackle this problem. So if you're interested in getting involved this season, we have our Adapta Beach Spring Kickoff happening April 24th. So that's kind of like our big start to the season. You can sign up today at adapt.greatlakes.org or register your own cleanup. If you're not available to do it that day, there'll be plenty of times throughout the season to do so. So we hope you'll join us and take part in our big day of action on April 24th. You can also consider getting involved with us through our curriculum. So we have a K through 12 curriculum, which is available for free online, and a lot of different free lesson plans. So we have things like creature cards, which kind of go into detail with some of the biodiversity that we see in this region. There's different lesson plans that you can use to incorporate those creature cards and kind of learn more about the different creature connections in the Great Lakes and food web connections. There's a lot of different, like I said, free lesson plans, and the whole curriculum for grades K through 12 is available on our website for free. And you can find that at greatlakes.org/education. Lots of resources there. We also, during the pandemic, started a series, a standalone series that was called Homeschool. It was a play on the acronym for the Great Lakes, HOMES, and that has a lot of different resources and short lessons and videos that are Great Lakes related. And there are some plastic pollution focused ones as well. So you can see some resources available there. There's a plastic log that you can use to kind of look at your plastic use for a period of time. So lots of resources there. Another way that you can kind of take action on this issue is through online advocacy. So during the pandemic, we've definitely increased kind of how we're engaging virtually with our volunteers, and specifically with programs like our Alliance ambassadors, who are deeply engaged volunteers with us. But there's ways you can kind of promote, if you're not able to attend a cleanup right now, there's ways you can promote these issues through, media like social media or through email, and get your community, increase awareness in your community about this issue. So for example, we have a lot of different, and I'll show our social media accounts here in a second, but we have a lot of different posts that you can share, retweet, get ideas from. and different things that you can share out on our website, like our plastic-free Great Lakes Pledge. And, we have different kind of examples, like I said, on our social media channels that you can use to sort of help increase awareness for this issue. So you can stay connected with us. Like I mentioned before, we have different action alerts like our Plastics-Free Great Lakes Pledge. You can find these action alerts at greatlakes.org/takeaction. We have a couple action alerts right now that are related to our federal priorities that I mentioned early on in the presentation. So we have one action alert that allows you to, that you see a photo here on the right, that allows you to tell Congress the Great Lakes are worth protecting, and it allows you to send a pre-written letter that details the federal priorities in our area, the federal priorities for us this year, and allows you to write a letter to your Congress people about that and saying that these are things that are important to you and are things you would like them to be considering. We also have one for the Biden administration, so you can take the action alert to send a letter to President Biden and tell him that these are things that you care about and want the Great Lakes to be protected. You can also follow us on social media and get a lot of up-to-date information there. So you can see our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts all up on the screen here. If you'd like to receive emails from us and get updates, you can go to greatlakes.org/subscribe. We send out things like e-newsletters where you can get up-to-date information on Great Lakes issues and how the Alliance is working to protect the Great Lakes. So these are all ways that you can stay connected with us and stay up to date on this information. And we would definitely be in touch with ways that you can continue to take action. So that's all that I have prepared for you all. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone from the National Biodiversity Teach-In. I really enjoy being able to present to you all today. I'm definitely available and free to answer any questions you have right now. But if you think of things afterwards, or if there's anything I mentioned in the presentation that you would like to get more information about, or like to have me send you information about, feel free to, like I said, reach out and email me at reda@greatlakes.org, and I'd be happy to assist. But thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Olivia, for teaching us about plastics in the Great Lake, and also, and more importantly, giving us so many ideas of ways that we can help and we can take action. Just some of the simple things. While you were talking, I actually ordered my Cora ball.
Oh, great.
For my laundry. First of all, how did you first become interested in plastics in the Great Lake, and what triggered your interest? What was your trigger?
Yeah, thank you, Frankie. That's a great question. I think for me, I think once I was at the Alliance and kind of that was an issue that was continuing to come up, and also since I'm directly involved with our Adapta Beach program, my work directly kind of relates to that topic quite a bit. But on a personal level, plastic pollution has always interested me. I feel that it's an issue that everyone can have their own connection to. So everyone can kind of put that into, if, for example, if you don't have much experience with, Asian carp or certain species in the Great Lakes, you would likely have some experience with, your own plastic use, or it's an easy connection for people to draw on how their use can impact the environment. And I also think, to me, it's a really interesting topic because, like you mentioned, Frankie, there's really a lot of different ways that anybody can take action. And there's really small actions you can take that make a big difference, especially in combination when everyone is, taking small actions. I think it's important to remember that in the environmentalism space, no one's doing it perfectly. I love being in the space of conservation, but I myself don't do this perfectly. But I think, just trying to learn more and take small actions is really important. I think you can really see a payoff when you talk about plastic pollution. So I think, to me, that's very interesting and rewarding.
Now, as you were going into high school and then going into college, what are some of the courses that you took to get you to the point that you're at today?
Great question. Yeah, so really back in high school, a course that was really influential to me were really, I guess, just in general, my biology courses. But I took a certain class called Project Biology. And through that course, we actually did spend a lot of time kind of talking about the Great Lakes region, and Lake Michigan. We did like a trip to the Indiana Dunes. We ended up getting certified in scuba diving and doing a trip to the Florida Keys. So it was very like water related, which for me helped kind of solidify like the direction I wanted to go in school and eventually in my career. And I would say like in college, I definitely, took a lot of different science courses kind of that spanned the spectrum quite widely. Things like chemistry, physics, things that were directly environmentally related. But I personally feel like it's really important to take like an interdisciplinary approach. And I sought out like a lot of courses in the humanities and in social science. And, I think it's important when you're talking about scientific issues to understand like the social impacts of those issues, which is kind of what brought me to the Alliance, because I feel like they kind of look at things from many angles. So I tried to kind of take as many kind of wide-ranging courses as possible.
Thank you. And in science education, we try to, part of our new standards is the science and engineering practices. And we teach students that, carrying on investigations is not the only practice of science. There are many others. How much of your time do you spend out in the field actively doing investigations?
Great question. Yeah, I would say, and I guess investigation, you're kind of thinking like you're kind of like more gathering the data. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I would say very little of my current position involves that. I've had past positions where I would say that was like I've done surveying type positions where that was maybe like pretty much solely what I was doing. But I would say my position now is definitely kind of involves like the other like parts of science that you're referring to, kind of like processing that information and relaying that information to the public, and education and advocacy, and kind of some citizen science, so some data collection at our cleanups. But a lot of it for me is kind of the community side of science, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing that we've talked about throughout this month when we talk to scientists is how has COVID impacted your job?
Great question. Yeah, it has. I think day to day it's impacted, I guess, my specific job quite a bit, just because my job involved quite a bit of interaction with our volunteers and leading Adapta Beach cleanups, attending cleanups, visiting, our team leaders at cleanups. And we were fortunate to be able to still kind of hold cleanups throughout the season, although they did look quite a bit, quite a bit differently. Had to follow all the local guidelines, things like that. But in that way, it's impacted, kind of our programming quite a bit. I would say it's allowed us to kind of get creative in like what other types of advocacy we can provide and help push for with our volunteers. So we've, done some different trainings on how to do like social media advocacy, and kind of like some more virtual like trainings and things like that. So I think, in many ways people have just been forced to get creative and kind of rethink programming, which some of that I think we'll take with us, when we're able to return to in-person events.
Now, you're working with the Great Lakes. Is Lake Michigan the main lake that you work with, or do you work with the other lakes as well?
Yeah, so when I first started at the Alliance, I was an outreach affiliate specifically for Illinois and Indiana. So I did deal, with Lake Michigan and like surrounding communities, pretty much mainly dealing with, that area. But now my work definitely is across the Great Lakes. We're a regional organization. I guess before the Alliance, just my personal background was definitely tied to Lake Michigan from my own experience, but I've really enjoyed getting to kind of interact with the region as a whole.
Do you find that there's more plastics in one of the lakes than the others?
That's a great question. I'm not really aware of the breakdown. I know, let's see. I had some notes about one of the studies. Okay, so the Rochester Institute of Technology study, which was the one that allows us to know that over 22 million pounds of plastic are ending up in the Great Lakes every year, it looks like Lake Michigan was at 5,000 metric tons, and that amount being the most out of the 5 lakes. But that's just one, one example, one study. I'm not quite sure other than that, like the breakdown.
Do you have a favorite area that you've visited throughout all of the lakes?
There's so many amazing areas, but I have a soft spot for the Indiana Dunes State Park. I think just growing up, I went there all the time. My mother's mom took her family there all the time, so it's kind of like a family, kind of a familial connection to that area. And just kind of growing up there, I think that kind of inspired me to work with the Great Lakes. And I also really enjoy going to that specific spot throughout the seasons, kind of going in the winter, going in the summer. And right now I live in uptown neighborhood in Chicago. And I'm actually looking at the lake right now. So I live right across from the lake. So I really enjoy getting to check out Chicago beaches that I, wasn't really aware of before. So I'm right by Foster Avenue Beach and Montrose Beach, which have been really nice during the pandemic to take some time in nature.
Definitely. I have some questions from the YouTube channel. So one of the questions actually that's in the Q&A is the exact same question that I asked about the pandemic. How has that affected your work?
Yes.
So here's one that says, this seems like such a huge problem. Are there lots of organizations monitoring it?
Yeah, I would say, we definitely, our work, I would say kind of crosses over with a lot of other organizations, regionally and also even internationally. So the Ocean Conservancy kind of handles data internationally from cleanup. So we share data with the Ocean Conservancy. In September is International Coastal Cleanup Day, and we participate through our September Adapta Beach program. And that, September Adapta Beach or International Coastal Cleanup is kind of, people are taking efforts all across the globe. So yeah, we definitely, do kind of have different relationships with other organizations, some more regional, like I said, some more international. I know the Shedd Aquarium here in Chicago does, I think I want to say they call them Great Lakes Action Days, but they do cleanups through our program and stuff too. So yeah, a lot of great connections on this issue for sure.
Here is a question from the chat from Autumn McGowan. She says, does the Alliance work with Canadian or Indigenous organizations on the Great Lake conservation as well?
That's a great question. Thanks, Autumn. Yeah, I'm sure. I know, like I said, we have, I guess I'm not super familiar with what those relationships look like. I'm sure that different of my colleagues do have, collaborate with, different organizations, Canadian organizations. I know we do have people participating in the volunteer programs and cleanups, because that's something that I deal directly with. But yeah, I'm not sure on the specifics on that, but I'm sure that, there is collaboration, being that we share, this huge ecosystem.
Thank you. Here's another question from YouTube. Are there bills to protect Great Lakes that are similar going through both US and Canadian legislators? Do they cooperate?
Great question. Yes, I'm sure there's, different, I guess, once again, I'm not really, a lot of my position doesn't really deal directly with the policies like that. But I know that there's different, collaboration with things like that, and, different things like the Great Lakes Compact, where it deals with diversion of water out of the Great Lakes watershed or things like that. I'm not quite sure on the policy relationship there. And I can definitely get you more information on that if you provide your email. But yes, I'm sure there's definitely relationships like that when talking about different bills and legislation that deals with a shared space like that.
Thank you. I have another question here. How often do you use structure and function, or cause and effect, in your work? Structure and function, or cause and effect? Those are two of our cross-cutting concepts in our science standards.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand that. So structure, can you give me a little maybe
structure and function would be, how does the structure of the system affect how does the function of the system how is the function of the system affected by its structure?
Okay. I mean, I guess, could that be something like the structure of a volunteer program, or it's more so the structure of an ecosystem?
It can be either. It can be any
Okay.
way that structure and function is involved.
Okay.
So cause and effect, does that seem to be more one? That's another cross-cutting concept. Does that seem to be
Yes.
a cross-cutting
Yeah.
concept that that's more part of your job?
Yeah, I would say cause and effect quite a bit, because we're kind of I think a lot of, my work personally, and also just through our volunteer programs, you're kind of seeing issues come up, and then like I kind of like how we like looked at the different impacts for plastic pollution. You're seeing how that's then affecting the ecosystem or communities or the environment, and kind of getting creative with how you're communicating that to to the public at large. So yeah, I would say cause and effect quite a bit. I'm trying to think of some good examples of kind of how structure would impact. I think we think a lot about like the structure of like decision making and kind of how to plug communities into that structure. So we're a nonpartisan 501c3, but for example, we put out like a voter toolkit about how to like engage with your decision makers on Great Lakes issues. So I think thinking about social structures is something that we think a lot about, in addition to thinking about more like natural structures like an ecosystem, which I think affects our work quite a bit, because we're thinking about, okay, nutrient pollution is coming into Lake Erie. How does that affect the whole system? How does that affect the communities in that system? How does that affect the wildlife in that system, the drinking water, our resources, different things like that.
Great. Are there any more questions out there? If anyone has any more questions, please add them to the question and answer. I'll check once more on YouTube. Okay, Olivia, I think you've answered all of our questions. I want to thank you very much for coming and talking with us today. We've learned a lot, and we have a lot of things that we can take away from this, a lot of things that we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frankie. I really enjoyed being here, and thank you so much for having me, facilitating the conversation. And thank you to all of you for listening. Feel free to be in touch.
Great. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.